He takes only 1 second to end a life. Today's story is about a terrifying man who only wants to keep the people around him happy. And for that, he can go to any extent, even take a life. But before we dive into this chilling tale, make sure to hit that subscribe button. At the beginning of the story, we see Bob. However, since we learned from Susan in the previous episode that Bob's real name is Robert, we will call him Robert in this episode. Anyway, Robert was sitting inside a train heading toward Istanbul. He spends his days reading books and goes to the train's bar at night to have his tea. While making tea with water, a man sees him from behind and asks, "Which country are you from?" Robert replies, "America." Thinking Robert is an American Muslim, the man starts a conversation with him and asks, "Why have you come to Turkey?" Robert says, "I am looking for a man who forcibly brought his own daughter from America to Turkey. It's not that he loves his daughter very much. In fact, he took her away to hurt his ex-wife." Hearing this, the man realizes that Robert is looking for him because he himself had kidnapped his daughter. So, he instructs his associates to kill Robert. But is Robert that easy to take down? In the blink of an eye, he records all their movements. Then, one by one, he eliminates them and approaches Amir, the man he was looking for. Robert tells him, "There are two kinds of pain in this world. One that gives intense suffering, and another that teaches a lesson. Which one do you want to experience today?" Amir realizes that it's better to learn a lesson today. So, he hands his daughter over to Robert. Now, we see Agatha in America, the woman who got her daughter back. Agatha bursts into tears of joy. Just then, a man comes and says, "We don't know who rescued the child from Turkey. Someone just left the child in front of our office 45 minutes ago." Next, we see Robert now earning his living by driving a taxi. Today, he had picked up an elderly man. This man was Russian, who lost his entire family during World War II and was later adopted by an American couple. Anyway, Robert continues with his work, giving rides to unknown, unfamiliar people one after another. Each passenger had different emotions. Some were happy in his car, while others were crying. Watching all this, Robert's days would pass by. After finishing work and returning home, we see that he lives next door to a Muslim woman named Fatima. Everyone knew Robert well. He would help others and stay cheerful with everyone. Tonight, Robert was doing his usual routine, cooking, reading books, and so on. Just then, the scene shifts to Brussels, the capital of Belgium, where a man returns home after office hours. But as soon as he enters, he sees that someone has brutally beaten his wife. Before he could understand anything, a group of men caught them. Terrified, Calbert asks, "Who are you? Why are you attacking us?" The men reply, "Because we were given your photos. It doesn't matter what you've done." Saying this, one of them kills Calbert's wife in front of him and then forces him to shoot himself. Meanwhile, Robert was at a bookstore to buy a new book. There, he meets the woman whose child he had rescued from Turkey. The child immediately recognizes Robert, but Robert gestures to keep quiet and leaves with his book. Later that night, Robert goes out with his taxi, and a call comes from a 5-star hotel requesting a ride. When Robert arrived, a young man put a drunk girl in his car and asked him to take her to a specific address. Seeing the girl, Robert immediately realized that the guys might have drugged her and done something bad. So he went back to their room. Robert said, "The credit card you gave me for the taxi fare has been declined. I came to collect the fare." The guys were about to hand him the cash when Robert said, "The girl you put in my car is very sick. I've admitted her to the hospital." The guys replied, "Whatever happens to that girl is none of our concern. We don't even know her." Robert said, "Until today, I've given everyone a chance to listen to me, but not today." Saying this, he broke their hands, legs, and fingers one by one. Before leaving, he warned them, "Make sure to give me a 5-star rating, or I'll be back to deal with you again." Afterward, when Robert returned home, he noticed that the lights in his room were on. He took his gun and prepared himself. But as soon as he entered, he realized that his friend Susan had come to see him. Susan was the only person Robert could trust with his eyes closed. That night, they had dinner together and talked for a long time. Susan was going abroad for a project, so she came to meet Robert before leaving. After their conversation, Robert put Susan in a taxi and sent her to the airport. The next morning, as soon as Robert woke up, he saw that the beautiful garden made by Fatima had been destroyed by someone. The wall was covered with graffiti. Fatima, heartbroken, said, "Some drunk kids did this." Hearing this, Robert started painting over the graffiti to make the wall look better. At that moment, a boy named Miles arrived. He told Robert, "You are just a tenant. Fixing the wall is the landlord's job. Why are you doing it?" Robert replied, "Well, someone has to do it, so why not me?" Miles said, "If you want, I can make some beautiful art on it because I am an art student, but it will cost you $400. Robert said, "That's too much." Finally, they agreed on $200. However, Robert had one condition. Miles had to attend school first, otherwise he wouldn't get the job. Meanwhile, Susan was having a video call with her colleagues. Here, we learn that the man who was killed in Brussels was an agent just like Susan. Investigating who killed him was now Susan and her colleague Dave's responsibility. During the meeting, they decided to leave for Brussels the next day. On the other hand, Robert was sitting by the seaside talking to the old man Samuel. Samuel said, "You know, Robert, when I was 9 years old, the war broke out. My parents died, and when my little sister and I were trying to survive, a group of social workers took us to a camp, but they separated us into different camps. Since that day, I've never found my sister again. When I was a child, I drew a picture of her. At the age of 60, while working in Paris, I saw that painting in a museum. That was my only memory of my sister, but they sold the painting for $12 million. So I filed a lawsuit, and now I have evidence, some photographs. If I show these to the judge, they will realize that it's my painting. I will finally have my sister back through that picture." Poor Sam starts crying. After he leaves, a man comes and says, "Even though Sam's evidence is true, it is ineffective in court. Poor Sam is suffering so much for his sister." Hearing this, Robert meets Susan that day and asks her to look into Sam's sister. Since Susan was leaving for Brussels today, he bids her farewell as well. The next day, Robert sees Miles beautifully painting his wall. Meanwhile, upon arriving in Brussels, Susan and Dave begin investigating Agent Calbert's death. As they dig deeper, Susan realizes that it could not have been a suicide. Someone must have murdered him. Meanwhile, outside the court, Robert learns that the judge didn't pay any attention to Sam's statements. His evidence was not strong enough to claim the painting as his own. Poor Sam, crying, shows Robert his sister's picture and says, "I may never see my sister again." Meanwhile, following Robert's instructions, Susan looks into Sam's sister and uncovers some information. She informs Robert over the phone and then heads to her room with Dave. But as soon as she enters, two men suddenly attack her, demanding money. When Susan tells them that she doesn't have any money or jewelry, they start beating her brutally. Susan fights back bravely. Just then, the scene shifts, showing Robert standing with Miles, painting the wall. At that moment, Susan's husband calls Robert and informs him that Susan has been murdered. It feels like Robert's entire world has collapsed. He couldn't believe he had lost his only true friend. He silently attends Susan's funeral from afar. He doesn't show up in front of everyone because, according to the agency's files, Robert was reported dead long ago in a mission. After the ceremony, Robert secretly meets Susan's husband, Brian. Brian says, "I am sure someone murdered Susan. This was no ordinary mugging, but the police are treating it as a robbery. I don't know if I will ever get justice for my wife. The agency is investigating the case with Interpol, but I have lost everything, haven't I?" Hearing this, Robert takes it upon himself to investigate Susan's murder. Meanwhile, the two men who killed Susan were having a party in their apartment when a sudden explosion destroyed their entire place, killing them instantly. A group of unknown people orchestrated the attack from outside and quickly left. On the other hand, Robert could barely tolerate seeing Susan's lifeless body. He spends the whole night watching the CCTV footage of Susan getting into the elevator. Then, he notices something suspicious. The next day, Robert goes to meet Dave. Dave is shocked to see Robert alive because everyone thought he had died in an explosion. Robert explains, "I left the job in search of peace." Then he asks, "Did you talk to those two guys who got in the elevator with Susan?" Dave replies, "No, I didn't get the chance. They both died in a gas cylinder explosion in their apartment." Robert says, "Did you know that Susan never pressed her floor button in the elevator? Those two guys did it for her. They already knew which floor she lived on, and they killed her in such a way that she died instantly." This was the work of a trained killer. If it was a random mugging, the knife wounds would have been haphazard. This was definitely a plan. Someone used those guys to kill Susan and then eliminated them too, so no evidence would remain. Dave said, "Whatever you do, I'm with you. Susan's killers won't be spared." Meanwhile, when Robert returned home, he saw that Miles was hanging out with some gang members. Ignoring this, Robert focused on uncovering the mystery behind Calbert's murder, as he believed there was definitely a connection between Calbert's death and Susan's murder. After analyzing everything, Robert realized that someone else had killed Calbert. Calbert was left-handed, but his wife was shot by someone using their right hand, meaning there was another person involved. Robert immediately informed Dave about this. He suspected that someone was secretly pulling the strings from behind the scenes. The hidden figure knew that Susan would soon uncover the truth behind Calbert's murder, which is why she was killed. Later, while working in his room, something suddenly crossed Robert's mind, and he rushed out. He was actually going to rescue Miles, who was now sitting among criminals, intoxicated by drugs. Robert went there, fought off everyone, and dragged Miles out of the room. Seeing this, Miles angrily said, "What's your problem? Let me do my work. Painting walls won't pay my bills. I need to do something to earn money." Robert replied, "So you're going to sell drugs? Kill people? All right, here's a gun. Shoot me. Kill me." But Miles couldn't do it. Robert pressed the gun to his head and said, "You have no idea how terrifying death is. Leave all this. You have talent. You can do something better." Saying this, Robert returned home. Later, realizing his mistake, Miles came to apologize to Robert. Robert accepted him warmly. Looking at Robert's walls, Miles said, "Even your walls need some paint. If you want, I can paint them, but it'll cost you $150. Robert laughed and said, "All right, but you have to finish reading this book first. Then I'll pay you $200 for the job." After this, Robert went back to driving his taxi when an unusual man got into his car. The man was observing Robert very closely, and Robert quickly sensed the situation. He realized the man was planning to attack him. As expected, the man attacked, but Robert wasn't that easy to take down. Fighting inside the car, Robert killed him. To destroy the evidence, he took the man's phone and set the entire car on fire. The next morning, we see Dave enjoying time with his family. Suddenly, Robert arrived at his house. Robert easily mingled with Dave's family, and then they sat down separately to talk. Robert said, "I was attacked yesterday. I found the attacker's phone, but the strange thing is, I saw that you had spoken with him multiple times. Now tell me the truth, Dave. What's really going on?" Dave realized he had been caught. He confessed, "You were supposed to be dead. Do you know what happened after that? Just 3 months later, the agency shut down our mission. After that, a few of us secretly joined a private agency. For every private mission we completed, we were paid huge sums of money. We were just given a photo and an order, and we carried out the kills. It was the same work we did for the country under DIA. DIA, or Defense Intelligence Agency, is one of America's intelligence agencies." Robert asked, "But why Susan? What did she do?" Dave replied, "A security agreement was about to be signed between the US and Brussels, which posed a threat to many powerful nations. So an order was given to eliminate Calbert, who was facilitating the agreement. Later, when Susan started uncovering the mystery behind Calbert's murder, she almost caught us. That's why she became the next target. We just did our job. There was nothing personal. The dangerous work Susan was doing would have gotten her killed sooner or later. So yes, I was the one who killed her. Even after the attack by those 2 guys, Susan survived. But later, I personally killed her." Hearing this, Robert took Dave outside and met with some of his former agent friends who had been working secretly for a private agency and were responsible for the murders of Calbert and Susan. Robert said, "The biggest regret for you is that you killed my friend, and my biggest regret is that I can only kill you once." After that, Robert returned to Dave's house where his wife and children were waiting. Later, we see that Dave sent his men to kill Susan's husband, Brian. They broke into the house looking for Brian, but by then, Robert had arrived and rescued him. They took shelter in a safe house. Meanwhile, Miles had come to Robert's house to paint. It was raining heavily outside. In the middle of the downpour, Miles called Robert because he saw a few men posing as pizza delivery guys entering Robert's house. Robert realized they were Dave's men, so he instructed Miles to quickly go to his bedroom. Inside the room, there was a bookshelf with a hidden button underneath a book. Robert told Miles to pull out the book and press the secret button, which revealed a hidden space behind the shelf. By then, Dave and his men had already entered the house, while Robert was monitoring them through CCTV cameras. As Dave slowly approached a mirror, Miles, who was hiding behind it, became terrified. It was a one-way mirror, meaning that while nothing could be seen from the front, Miles could clearly see everyone from behind it. Just as Dave was about to shoot at the mirror, Robert called him and said, "You want to kill me, right? Then come meet me at my real house." Dave knew Robert's real house was by the seashore, so they all left the house immediately. A while later, thinking the coast was clear, Miles slowly stepped out of his hiding place, but Dave caught him. Meanwhile, Robert was heading towards his seaside house, where a huge storm was brewing. Despite the harsh weather, Robert reached his house, and Dave and his men were already waiting for him. Dave instructed his men to search the area while he climbed up a tower with a sniper rifle, preparing to shoot Robert from a distance. As one of Dave's men entered Robert's house, Robert killed him using a large fishing harpoon. Realizing that one of their men was dead, the rest of the team became increasingly cautious. However, Robert ambushed another man and stabbed him to death with a knife. Dave realized he had already lost 2 men but couldn't do anything because the sniper couldn't locate Robert. Meanwhile, Robert shot at an electrical transmitter, creating a thick cloud of smoke all around. He even went into a room and tore open several sacks of flour, causing them to scatter in the air so that Dave could not see anything from above. After that, Robert blew up another of Dave's men with a bomb. Seeing the explosion, Dave became quite frightened. He was now determined to kill Robert at any cost. So he called Robert and said, "Enough, Robert. Come out now. I have taken that boy from your house. If you don't come forward, I'll shoot and kill him, who's locked in the car trunk." Then Dave started shooting at the car one after another, but Robert did not appear. Enraged, Dave was about to shoot the boy when Robert shot the car's tire, causing Dave to miss his target. Not only that, but the force of the storm also caused a rope to snap and hit Dave hard, knocking him down and injuring his head severely. Despite the injury, he quickly tried to locate Robert again using his sniper. However, by then, Robert had climbed up the tower and launched a surprise attack from behind. In the midst of the raging storm, the two engaged in a fierce battle. After a terrifying fight, Robert brutally killed Dave and threw him off the tower. The enormous ocean waves carried away Dave's lifeless, shattered body. After that, Robert rescued Miles and brought him back to his house, where he once lived with his wife. Robert noticed that Miles had been shot in the leg, but since the wound was minor, they both sat down and watched the mighty storm over the sea. A few days later, we see that Miles is now leading a normal life and going to school like other kids. As a tribute to Mr. Robert, he painted a beautiful mural on Fatima's wall. Moreover, based on the information provided by Susan before her death, they finally managed to locate the long-lost sister of the old man, Sam. After so many years, finding his sister filled Sam with immense joy and happiness. All of this was made possible because of Robert, a man who found peace in easing people's pain. With that, this story comes to an end.